They stripped my title, took my passport, took my prime years, 3.5 years when I should have been fighting. The whole world turned against me. Even my own religious community walked away. I stood alone. But you know what I discovered standing in that loneliness? The greatest champions in history, the real warriors, they all walked alone. Heavyweights don't buddy together, son. You don't see lions traveling in packs when they're hunting. And when God is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine, He's got to separate you first. He's got to strip away everything you think makes you special. Because what you're feeling right now, that isolation, that's not punishment, that's preparation. In the next 40 minutes, I'm going to show you why your isolation is your greatest classroom. Not from theory, from lived experience. From standing alone when the whole world was against me, and I ain't talking about feeling a little lonely on a Saturday night. I'm talking about the kind of loneliness that tests whether you got real faith or just words. The kind that shows you who you really are when nobody's watching. The kind that either breaks you or makes you into something you never imagined you could be. See, I know what you're going through right now. Nobody gets why you can't just go along, why you can't fake it, why you have to stand for what you believe, even when it costs you everything. You try to explain to people what you're feeling, what you believe, what you see, and they look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. They tell you you're being too serious, too intense, too different. They say you need to lighten up, fit in, stop making everything so difficult. And that makes the loneliness even worse, because now you're not just alone, you're misunderstood. Then there's that feeling when your phone stops ringing, when invitations dry up, when people you thought were friends start looking at you different. Maybe they don't say anything directly, but you feel it. The distance, the judgment, the way they change the subject when you talk about what matters to you, the way they stop including you because you make them uncomfortable now, that hurts worse than if they just came out and said they don't want you around. At least then you'd know where you stand. And then come those 3 in the morning moments. You know the ones I'm talking about? When you're lying there in the dark and the doubt creeps in like fog. When you start wondering if you made the right choice. If standing alone was worth it. If maybe everyone else was right and you were wrong. Maybe you should have just kept your mouth shut. Maybe you should have gone along to get along. Maybe this loneliness is proof that you messed up. Those thoughts will eat you alive if you let them. And on top of all that, there's the confusion about purpose. You know somewhere deep down that you're supposed to be doing something different, that you're not meant to live like everybody else, but all you see is loss. Where's the blessing in this loneliness? Where's the breakthrough? Where's God in all this isolation? You're standing for what you believe, doing what you think is right, and it feels like you're being punished for it. That don't make no sense. And nobody seems to have answers that satisfy the questions burning in your heart. I've been there. I sat exactly where you're sitting right now. I lost my championship, lost my income, lost 3.5 prime years when I should have been at my peak. The Nation of Islam turned their back on me. Millions of people hated me. The government wanted to throw me in prison. State after state refused to give me a license to fight. And in those dark hotel rooms, in those empty gyms, in those long, lonely drives to speaking engagements where maybe 50 people showed up, I asked God the same questions you're asking right now. Why does doing right feel so wrong? Why does standing for truth feel so lonely? Why does following my conscience cost so much? But through that isolation, I discovered who I really was. And more important, I discovered who was really with me. When you strip away the crowd, only truth remains. Only God remains. And that's when your real power shows up. See, when everybody's agreeing with you and life is comfortable, you don't know what you really believe. You don't know if your faith is real or if you're just riding someone else's conviction. You don't know if you got the strength to stand or if you've just been leaning on the crowd the whole time. But isolation answers those questions. Loneliness is the test that separates what you say you believe from what you actually believe. You think you're being punished by this loneliness? I'm going to show you. You're being promoted. Most people spend their whole lives surrounded by noise, distraction, and people who agree with them just to keep the peace. They never discover what they're really made of. They never learn to hear God's voice above the crowd. They never develop the kind of faith that can stand alone. They never become who they were meant to be because they're too busy being who everybody else wants them to be. But not you. You got taken out of the crowd. You got separated. You got isolated. And I know it hurts. I know it's lonely. But that isolation is the greatest gift you've ever been given. The world taught you that success means being popular, having everybody like you, fitting in, going along. Let me tell you something. That ain't success. That's slavery. Real freedom means standing alone when you have to. Real strength means keeping your faith when nobody else believes. Real victory means choosing truth over comfort. What you call loneliness, I call liberation. What you call isolation, I call transformation. What you call the worst time of your life, I call the making of your greatness. This ain't motivational speeches. This ain't psychology. This is survival wisdom from a man who walked through the fire and came out stronger. I'm going to give you the exact spiritual principles that carried me through the darkest isolation of my life. The same faith that let me sleep at night knowing I might go to prison. The same conviction that made me strong enough to lose everything and still stand tall. The same understanding that turned my wilderness into my classroom and my loneliness into my greatest teacher. By the end of this, you won't just understand your loneliness, you'll embrace it as your greatest teacher. You'll see it for what it really is, God's boot camp for champions. God's classroom for the chosen. God's preparation for people He's about to use in mighty ways. I see you. Sitting there wondering if it's ever going to get better, wondering if you made a mistake, wondering if standing for what you believe was worth losing what you lost. I've been there. I sat in that exact place. And I'm here to tell you, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And that choice is about to make you into something you never imagined you could be. So stay with me. Let me take you on a journey through my wilderness so I can show you the way through yours. Let me take you back to a place I never wanted to go but had to. A place where I learned what loneliness really means and what it really teaches. It's 1967. For months, I'd been trying to prepare myself for what would happen if I refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces. The pressure was coming from everywhere. The military, politicians, promoters offering me deals, even some people I respected trying to convince me to go along. I was training camp when the calls started getting more intense. They told me I could keep my boxing career and remain the heavyweight champion if I just went against my religious beliefs. They said I'd never hold a gun. They said I'd just give boxing exhibitions. They said I'd never come near a battlefield. Even if that was true, I still couldn't go. They wanted to use me to lead other young American men into that war. They wanted to parade me around like everything was fine. But I knew what I believed. I knew what my faith required of me. And I knew that if I compromised on this, I would never be free again. But knowing what you believe and standing on it when the whole world is against you, those are two different things. I remember the night before I had to report to the induction center. Herbert Muhammad, that's Elijah Muhammad's son and my manager, he sat me down and said something I'll never forget. He said, "His teachings symbolically stand for life in this dark, ignorant, and confused world. Now that your eyes have been opened to the light, it's expected you'll see your own way. It will be your choice and your direction, and yours alone. Whatever that choice is, you've got to accept the outcome of your own decision. All the credit and all the blame will be yours. I'll not be standing there with you physically, because my presence is closely associated with that of my Father's, but I'll be with you in heart and spirit as always. This decision you make will determine the future of your life, and the decision is neither my Father's nor mine, it's yours and yours alone." That hit me hard, because up until that moment, I think part of me was hoping somebody would tell me what to do, that somebody would make the decision for me, that I could lean on somebody else's authority. But Herbert was telling me the truth I needed to hear. This was my choice, my stand, my consequence to bear. And in that moment, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Not physically alone, Herbert was right there, but spiritually alone, standing at a crossroads where only I could choose which path to take. I flew down to Houston the next morning. The whole flight I was going over it in my mind. What would happen when they called my name? Would I really have the courage to refuse? What if my knees gave out? What if fear took over? What if I wasn't as strong as I thought I was? And I kept hearing this voice in my head, who are you to judge? A politician in Chicago had asked me that. Who are you to judge whether the war is right or not? Who are you to stand against your government? Who are you to think you know better than everybody else? And for a moment, those questions shook me. But then another voice came, a stronger voice. And it said, who is this white man, no older than me, appointed by another white man, all the way down from the white man in the White House? Who is he to tell me to go to Asia, Africa, or anywhere else in the world to fight people who never threw a rock at me or America? Who is this descendant of slave masters to order a descendant of slaves to fight other people in their own country? And that's when something changed in me. That's when I felt fear draining from my body and a rush of anger taking its place. Not angry at any person, but angry at injustice, angry at being used, angry at the lie that said I had to betray my conscience to be a good citizen. I got to the Houston Induction Center and they took us into a room. There must have been about 24 of us, young men from all different backgrounds, and I could feel everybody's eyes on me. They knew who I was, they knew what I'd said publicly, they knew I was going to refuse, and I think some of them were secretly hoping I'd go through with it. Maybe they wanted to refuse too, but didn't have the courage. Or maybe they were just curious to see if the loudmouth boxer really meant what he said. The lieutenant started calling names. One by one, men stepped forward when their name was called, and with each name, the room got quieter, the tension built. Everybody knew my turn was coming. And then I heard it. Cassius Clay, Army. My old name. The name I'd given up. But that wasn't even what I was thinking about in that moment. I stood there, straight and still, and I didn't move. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The lieutenant stared at me for a long while, then lowered his eyes. One of the recruits snickered, and the lieutenant looked up abruptly, his face red, and ordered everyone else out of the room. They shuffled out quickly, leaving me standing there alone. That moment right there, that's when the real loneliness started. Not the moment I refused, the moment after, because refusing was just following my conscience. But what came after, that's when I learned what it costs to follow your conscience. They stripped my title almost immediately. The New York State Athletic Commission suspended my boxing license, then every other state followed. My passport was taken from me, so I couldn't fight overseas. The government wanted to make an example out of me. They wanted to show every other young man what happens when you stand up against the system. But you know what hurt worse than all of that? The Nation of Islam turned their back on me, my spiritual family, the community that had given me my name, my purpose, my understanding of who I was. They didn't publicly support my stand. They couldn't associate with me because of the heat I was bringing, and I understood why, politically and legally, they had to distance themselves. But understanding don't make it hurt less. I felt like I'd been cast out into the wilderness with no map and no supplies. So there I was. No title, no income, no passport, no community, and 3.5 of my prime fighting years stretching out in front of me like a desert. I was 25 years old. I should have been at my peak. I should have been defending my title. I should have been making history in the ring. Instead, I was opening a restaurant called Champ Burgers just to feed my family. I was doing a Broadway play called Big Time Buck White that didn't last very long. I was driving from city to city, giving lectures at universities, speaking to whoever would listen about my beliefs. And let me tell you about those lonely nights in hotels. Those empty gyms where I trained by myself because I couldn't fight. Those long drives where it was just me and the road and my thoughts. The world had moved on. Other fighters were getting the matches I should have had. The press was writing my obituary, saying I'd thrown away my career, saying I was done, saying I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And there were moments, I ain't gonna lie to you, there were moments when I wondered if they were right. I remember one morning in Philadelphia, I was staying at a cheap motel, waiting for Joe Frazier to pick me up. We were supposed to drive to New York together, and I was going to interview him for my autobiography. And I stood in front of that bathroom mirror and I looked at myself and I asked, was it worth it? All this loneliness, was it worth standing up for what I believed? I had no money, no prospects, no way back into boxing that I could see. The government was still trying to put me in prison. And I felt more alone than I'd ever felt. But that's when something happened. Right there in that cheap motel bathroom, looking at my own face in the mirror, something clicked inside me. And I realized I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. God was there the whole time, watching, strengthening me, teaching me. That isolation wasn't emptiness. It was His classroom. He was teaching me something nobody else could teach. He was showing me that my faith was real, not just words. He was proving to me that I could stand when everyone else sat down. He was building something in me that could only be built in the wilderness. And more than that, I started seeing my wilderness differently. All those lectures I was giving at universities, I was reaching young people who needed to hear that you could stand for something. All those conversations in Harlem with brothers who were struggling, I was showing them that Black men didn't have to accept what the system told us we had to accept. All those lonely nights were teaching me compassion for every person who'd ever felt alone, who'd ever been misunderstood, who'd ever paid a price for doing what they believed was right. My wilderness wasn't just about me, it was preparing me for something bigger. 3.5 years. That's how long I was in exile from boxing. 3.5 years of financial struggle, of uncertainty, of wondering if I'd ever fight again. But you know what I learned in those 3.5 years? I learned more about myself than I'd learned in my entire life up to that point. I learned that faith is not about hoping things work out. Faith is knowing that even if things don't work out the way you planned, you're going to be all right because God's got you. I learned that standing alone don't mean you're weak. It means you're strong enough to be yourself even when it costs everything. I learned that the crowd's opinion of you don't determine your worth. Only God's opinion matters. And I learned that loneliness is not your enemy, it's your teacher. And then, after 3.5 years, the Supreme Court overturned my conviction. I was free to fight again. And when I came back, I wasn't the same fighter I'd been before. I was better. Not physically. I'd lost some of my speed and some of my prime years. But mentally and spiritually, I was stronger than I'd ever been, because I'd been tested in a way most champions never get tested. I'd had to fight for my right to be myself. I'd had to stand alone for what I believed. And that made every fight after that easier, because I'd already fought the hardest fight. I'd already faced my deepest fear. I'd already walked through the valley and come out the other side. Years later, I got a letter from the husband of a woman named Florence Beaumont. She was a housewife in Texas who had supported my stand against the draft. And she was so moved by my willingness to sacrifice everything for my beliefs that she set herself on fire on the steps of a federal building in California, just like that nun in Saigon who protested the war. Her husband wrote me and said, "Florence and I often talked about you. Your sacrifice and dedication inspired her. She wanted to follow you in spirit." When I read that letter, I was shocked. I was moved. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I didn't stand alone for me. I stood alone so others would see it could be done. My wilderness was their map. My loneliness was their encouragement. My sacrifice was their inspiration. That's when I understood the full purpose of isolation. It's not just about what God is doing in you, it's about what God is preparing you to do for others. Every prophet walked alone first so they could lead others later. Every leader spent time in the desert so they could guide others through theirs. And you, sitting here right now feeling alone, you're not being punished. You're being positioned. You're being prepared. You're being transformed into someone who can help others when they face their own wilderness. This loneliness has purpose beyond you. Now let me break down what I learned in that wilderness. These are the principles that carried me through, and they'll carry you too. Everything I'm about to tell you, I learned in the darkness of isolation. Not from books, from battle. The first thing you need to understand is this. You cannot become your true self in a crowd. The crowd will always push you toward normal, toward safe, toward what everybody else is doing. That's just how crowds work. They need everybody to be the same so nobody challenges their choices. They need everybody to fit in so nobody makes them question whether they're living right. Growth requires separation. Think about it. A caterpillar don't become a butterfly surrounded by other caterpillars cheering it on. It goes into that cocoon alone, in the dark. And the darkness is not its enemy. The darkness is its classroom. Inside that cocoon, everything about that caterpillar is breaking down and being rebuilt. It's painful, it's confusing. If that caterpillar could talk, it would probably say, "I'm dying in here. Why is this happening to me? Where did everybody go?" But what's really happening is transformation. That caterpillar is becoming something it could never become if it stayed comfortable. Your isolation is your cocoon. What you call loneliness, I call the womb of transformation. Remember that old story I love about Raphael and Cushman? There was a powerful warrior named Raphael who couldn't be defeated. He was so strong and proud of his strength that nobody could match him. Then he left the kingdom, and during his absence, his son Cushman was born. The king raised this boy, and he became a great warrior too. When Raphael came back, the king arranged for them to fight without telling Cushman that Raphael was his father. And Cushman beat Raphael, who was too proud to surrender. So Cushman was about to kill him when Raphael revealed he was Cushman's father. And Raphael said, "I am happy to know that I have not been defeated by anyone other than my own son, who is my own self." You see what that story teaches? God uses isolation to humble us, to strip away our pride, to show us that our real power comes from Him, not from our own strength. Raphael had to be defeated by his own son to learn humility. And sometimes God lets us be defeated by our own expectations, our own pride, our own need to be right. He strips all that away in the wilderness. He shows us we're not as strong as we thought we were, and that's not a bad thing. That's necessary. Because until you know you're weak, you can't receive real strength. Until you know you're lost, you can't be found. Until you know you're alone, you can't discover that God's been there all along. What you call loneliness, I call the stripping away of everything false. Every friend who left wasn't really a friend, they were a fan. They liked what you could do for them, not who you were. Every opportunity you lost wasn't your real opportunity. It was a trap disguised as a blessing. Every door that closed was keeping you from something that would have taken you off your path. God is clearing the stage for what's real. He's removing the extras from your life story so the real characters can step forward. He's taking away the props so you can see what you're really standing on. Most people run from this isolation. They can't sit still with themselves. They fill every moment with noise, distractions, crowds of people who don't really know them. They'll do anything to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But that's a mistake. You need to sit in this loneliness. You need to let it teach you the pain you're feeling. That's labor pains. Something's being born. And if you run from the labor, you'll never see the birth. You'll stay stuck as the old version of yourself, wondering why you never became who you were meant to be. But here's what nobody tells you about this transformation. It shows you what you're really made of. Standing alone reveals your true foundation. When everybody's with you, you don't know what you really believe. You don't know if your faith is yours or if you're just riding somebody else's conviction. You don't know if you're strong or if you're just leaning on strong people. Isolation is the test that shows what you're built on. That's why God takes us to the wilderness. That's why Jesus went 40 days alone before starting his ministry. That's why every prophet walked alone at some point. That's why Moses was in the desert for 40 years. That's why David was hiding in caves. The wilderness asks one question: what do you believe when nobody's believing with you? What do you stand for when nobody's standing with you? Who are you when all the titles are stripped away, All the relationships are gone. All the applause has stopped. That's the real you. And you better know who that is. When I stood in that induction center, I didn't have the crowd. I didn't have my trainers around me pumping me up. I didn't have the nation backing me publicly. I didn't have my mama there telling me it was going to be okay. It was me and God. And that's when I found out my faith was real. It wasn't something I inherited. It wasn't something I was doing because other people expected it. It was bone-deep conviction. It was truth that lived in my soul. And I only discovered that because I was forced to stand alone. If you need people's approval to stand for truth, you'll fall the minute they walk away. If you need the crowd's support to do what's right, you'll compromise the moment they disagree. If you need constant encouragement to keep going, you'll quit when the encouragement stops. But if your foundation is built on truth, on faith, on conviction that comes from God and not from people, then you can stand when everybody else falls. You can keep going when everybody else quits. You can maintain your integrity when everybody else compromises. Isolation is God's way of sifting. It separates the people who love the real you from the people who loved what you could do for them. It separates the friends from the fans. It separates your ego from your true identity. It separates what you say you believe from what you actually believe. When it costs something to believe it, it's painful to watch people walk away. It hurts to see who stays and who goes. But it's necessary. You can't build your future on relationships that can't survive your transformation. You can't fulfill your destiny dragging people who don't believe in where you're going. This loneliness you're feeling, it's showing you who you are when the lights are off. When the applause stops. When nobody's watching. When there's no benefit to being good, no reward for doing right, no recognition for standing strong, that's your real character. And if you don't like what you see in that mirror, you got time to fix it. But you gotta face it first. You can't fix what you won't acknowledge. You can't change what you won't confront. The wilderness forces you to look at yourself honestly, and that honesty is the beginning of real transformation. And once you face it, once you know who you really are beneath all the masks and the performances and the versions of yourself you created to please other people, something powerful happens. You start living from truth instead of fear. You start making decisions based on who you are instead of who people want you to be. You start walking in freedom instead of slavery to other people's opinions. And that freedom, that authenticity, that's what the world is dying to see. That's what people respond to. Not the fake you, not the version that's trying to fit in, the real you. The one that can only emerge in isolation. Now here's something deeper that most people never discover. Your isolation has purpose beyond you. The reason you feel alone is because you're being prepared for something that requires you to be different. You can't lead people out of darkness if you're afraid of your own darkness. You can't heal people's wounds if you haven't faced your own. You can't give people hope if you haven't found your own hope in the wilderness. God isolates you for a season so he can multiply you for a lifetime. I didn't know it at the time, but my stand against that war, my 3.5 years in the wilderness, it wasn't just about me. It was about every person who came after who needed to see someone stand alone for conscience. It was about every young man who was being told he had to go fight a war he didn't believe in. It was about every person who felt like they had to compromise their values to survive. I was walking the path so others could see the footprints. I was lighting the way so others wouldn't have to stumble in complete darkness. Every prophet walked alone first. Every leader spent time in the desert. Moses, David, Muhammad, Jesus, Gandhi, King. They had to be isolated so they could hear God's voice clear, without the noise of the crowd drowning it out. They had to learn to stand alone so they could lead later. They had to go through their wilderness so they could guide others through theirs. You think it's coincidence that every major figure in history spent time alone? No. That's how God prepares people for great assignments. He separates them from the crowd, so he can speak to them directly, so he can shape them without interference, so he can build them into something the world has never seen, You think you're alone by accident? You think this is random? No, you're being positioned. The very people who don't understand you now are going to need what you're learning in this isolation. Your wilderness is their future testimony. When they're going through their own dark night of the soul, they're going to remember that you went through it and came out stronger. When they're facing their own decision to stand alone or compromise, they're going to remember that you stood and survived. When they're wondering if God is real, if faith works, if truth matters, they're going to look at your life and see the proof. While you're alone, God is doing work in you that can only be done in silence. He's building your faith, He's deepening your roots, He's teaching you to hear His voice. He's developing character in you that can't be developed in comfort. He's creating compassion in you that can only come from suffering. He's forging strength in you that can only be forged in fire. You can't learn that in the spotlight. You can't develop that when everything's easy. You can't become that without the wilderness. This loneliness is school. And the degree you're earning is in humanity, in faith, in strength, in wisdom that'll serve you and everyone you're called to help for the rest of your life. There's something even deeper happening here. God speaks loudest in the silence. The crowd will always have an opinion. The world will always have advice. Your family will tell you what they think you should do. Your friends will have suggestions. The internet will tell you 10 different ways to live your life. But God's voice is quiet, and you can only hear it when everything else is turned down. That's why He brings you into the wilderness. Not to punish you, to talk to you, to teach you, to reveal things to you that you could never hear in the noise. In those quiet hotel rooms during my exile, when nobody was calling, when the world moved on without me, that's when I heard God clearest. Not in the arena with 20,000 people screaming my name, not at the press conferences with reporters firing questions, not even in the mosque with hundreds of people praying, in the silence, in the loneliness, in the moments when it was just me and Him. That's when He spoke. That's when He showed me things. That's when He gave me peace that didn't make no sense considering my circumstances. People often ask me questions I cannot very well answer in words, and it makes me sad to think they cannot understand the voice of my silence. When I got Parkinson's, it forced me into even deeper silence. I couldn't talk as much. I had to slow down. I had to listen more than I spoke. And you know what I found? More wisdom in stillness than I ever found in talking. More truth in silence than in all my speeches. More God in the quiet than in all the noise I used to make. When you're alone, you can't hide from yourself. You can't hide from your mistakes. You can't hide from your fears. You can't hide from your pride or your pain or your past. And you can't hide from God. That vulnerability, that nakedness before the divine, that's where real spiritual growth happens. That's where you stop pretending and start being real. That's where the masks come off and the real work begins. Most people spend their whole lives hiding from this moment. They stay busy, stay distracted, stay surrounded by people and noise because they're terrified of silence. They're terrified of being alone with God because He might ask them to change something. He might show them something they don't want to see. He might require something they don't want to give. But you can't run forever. Eventually, God will bring you to a place where you got no choice but to face yourself. And when He does, don't fight it. Don't fill the silence with noise. Don't run back to the crowd. Sit in it. Pray in it. Listen in it. Let God speak. Let Him show you who you really are, not who you've been pretending to be. Let Him reveal His plan, not the plan you made for yourself. Let Him teach you His ways, which are higher than your ways. The loneliness is not emptiness. It's God making space for Himself in your life. He's clearing out all the clutter so He can fill you with what really matters. When you start listening in that silence, here's what He's going to tell you. Your pain is producing character. What counts in the ring is what you can do after you're exhausted. Same is true of life. This loneliness is your conditioning. It's making you strong for what's coming. When I was training for a fight, the real work didn't start until the pain set in. First couple miles, I felt good. I was loose. I was fresh. Everything was easy. But the real conditioning, that began when the pain set in. That's when it was time to start pushing. That's when I would count every mile as extra strength and stamina. Everybody can run when they feel good. Everybody can stand for something when it's popular. Everybody can have faith when everything's working out. But champions, real champions, they keep going when they're hurting. They keep standing when everybody else sits down. They keep believing when circumstances say give up. The greater your purpose, the harder your preparation. God doesn't put light weight on shoulders that are meant to carry heavy things. If He's taking you through intense loneliness, intense isolation, intense wilderness, that means He's preparing you for something intense. This loneliness, this isolation, it's not breaking you, it's building you. Every day you stand alone in faith, you're getting stronger. The heart is resilient. It can be torn and mended, broken and made whole again. Rise and fall. Fall and rise. What gives a person the strength to stand up for a cause? What makes someone able to remain strong on the battlefield? What helps you endure all that may come in life? It's the heart, and your heart is being trained right now. Every day you choose faith over fear, you're strengthening your heart. Every day you choose truth over comfort, you're building your heart. Every day you stand alone and don't quit, you're conditioning your heart for the battles ahead. Some people are so decent, loving, and compassionate that the purity of their heart is almost visible. Those people didn't get that way by having an easy life. They got that way by going through fire and choosing not to become bitter. They went through betrayal and choosing to forgive. They went through loss and choosing to stay grateful. They went through loneliness and choosing to trust God anyway. The pain didn't destroy their heart. It refined it. It purified it. It made it stronger and softer at the same time. That's what's happening to you right now. This loneliness is making you more compassionate. This isolation is making you more understanding. This wilderness is making you more human. The man or woman who comes out of this isolation will not be the same person who went in. You're going to be wiser because you learned lessons you couldn't learn any other way. You're going to be stronger because you survived something that could have destroyed you. You're going to be more compassionate because you know what it feels like to suffer alone. You're going to be more convinced because your faith was tested in fire and it didn't burn up. You're going to be more dangerous to the enemy because you learned how to stand when standing was all you could do. You're going to be more valuable to God because you proved you'll follow Him even when it costs everything. This loneliness is labor, and what's being born is worth every painful moment. Now, I've told you the stories, I've taught you the lessons, but none of this matters if you don't put it into practice. Here's exactly what to do. Every morning when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you look at what the world is saying, you speak this truth out loud. I know where I'm going and I know the truth, and I don't have to be what you want me to be. I'm free to be what I believe. That's the declaration I live by. It anchored me when the storms came. When you speak it out loud, you're not just thinking it, you're proclaiming it, you're calling it into existence. You're reminding yourself whose you are. Don't whisper it. Say it strong. Say it like you mean it. Say it even when you don't feel it, especially when you don't feel it. Your feelings will follow your faith. Your emotions will catch up to your confession. I used to say I'm the greatest before I was the greatest. I said it so much that I started believing it. And once I believed it, I became it. That's how this works. You speak truth until it becomes your truth. You declare freedom until you walk in freedom. You proclaim strength until strength shows up. Speak it until you believe it. Speak it until it's bone-deep truth. Do this every single morning for the next 30 days and watch what changes inside you. Second thing, set aside 15 minutes every day, not for entertainment, not for distraction, for pure silence. No music, no TV, no scrolling, just you and God. Sit in it, let Him speak. I know it's uncomfortable at first. Your mind will race. You'll think of 100 things you should be doing. That's normal. Let those thoughts pass like clouds. You're not trying to empty your mind, you're trying to focus it on the divine. Ask Him, what are you teaching me through this isolation? What do you want me to see? What do you want me to learn? What are you preparing me for? Some days you won't hear anything. That's okay. The practice is the point. You're training yourself to be still, to listen, to wait on God instead of demanding answers on your timeline. This is where real wisdom comes from, not from books or preachers or podcasts, from personal communion with your Creator. I learned more in 15 minutes of silence with God than I learned in hours of people talking at me. Start with 15 minutes. If you can do more, but don't skip it. This is your daily appointment with the one who's walking you through this wilderness. He's got things to tell you. Make space to listen. Third thing, get a notebook. Write down what you're learning in this lonely season. Write down the fears, the doubts, the small victories, the moments when you almost gave up but didn't. Write it down. This serves two purposes. First, it helps you process what you're going through. You can't fight an enemy you don't name. Writing forces you to be honest about where you are. It helps you see patterns. It helps you track growth you might not notice otherwise. Second, this journal is going to be a testimony. When you come out of this wilderness, and you will come out, you're gonna need to remember what God brought you through. You're gonna need proof that He's faithful, and the people you're called to help are gonna need to hear this story. Don't make it complicated. 5 minutes before bed, 3 things you learned today. 1 way God showed up, 1 thing you're grateful for, even in the loneliness. That's it. Keep it simple. Keep it consistent. Some days you might write a lot, some days just a few sentences. That's fine, but do it every day. Your wilderness journal will become one of your most valuable possessions. Years from now, when someone's going through what you're going through, you'll be able to open that journal and say, I know how you feel. I've been there. Let me show you what I learned. Let me show you that you're going to make it. Fourth thing, find one person who's struggling, maybe struggling worse than you, and serve them. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's paying for someone's groceries, maybe it's just listening without judgment. But serve somebody. Service to others is the rent we pay for our room in heaven. But it's also the cure for self-pity. When you're serving someone else, you stop drowning in your own problems. You realize you're not the only one walking through fire. And sometimes you're exactly the person who can help them because you're walking through it too. I learned this during my exile. When I was speaking at universities, visiting people in need, sharing what little I had, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. My purpose got bigger than my pain. That's what service does. It transforms your isolation from a burden into a blessing you can share. You stop saying, why is this happening to me? And start saying, how can I use this to help someone else? You stop being a victim and become a vessel. You stop focusing on what you lost and start focusing on what you can give. Find one person this week and serve them. Then do it again next week. Make it a habit. Your loneliness will start to look different when you realize it's preparing you to help others through theirs. Do these 4 practices. Not 1, not 2, all 4, every day for the next 30 days. Write them down right now so you don't forget. Morning declaration. 15 minutes of silence with God. Daily journaling. Weekly service. This is your survival toolkit. This is how you turn loneliness into strength. This is how you transform your wilderness into your greatest classroom. I'm telling you, if you commit to these 4 practices, 30 days from now, you won't recognize yourself. You'll still be in the wilderness, but you won't be lost. You'll be growing. And that's the whole point. So let me bring this home. You feel alone because you're growing. You feel misunderstood because you're being prepared for something the crowd can't see yet. This loneliness is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It's your cocoon. It's the wilderness where God does His deepest work. It's the classroom where He teaches lessons you couldn't learn any other way. It's the training ground where he builds character that can't be built in comfort. Every single day you spend in this isolation is adding to your strength. It's deepening your faith. It's sharpening your purpose. It's preparing you for a level of impact you can't even imagine right now. I stood in that induction center alone. I lost my title alone. I spent 3.5 years in the wilderness alone. But I was never truly alone. God was there, truth was there, and the person I was becoming, the real me, he was there too, being born in the fire of isolation. And when I came out of that wilderness, I wasn't the same man who went in. I was stronger, wiser, more compassionate, more convinced, more powerful, because I learned to stand when everyone else sat down. I learned to believe when everyone else doubted. I learned to hear God's voice above the noise of the crowd. If you're in that place right now, if you're feeling like nobody understands, nobody's with you, nobody sees what you see, let me tell you what's really happening. You're being prepared. You're being positioned. You're being purified. And when you come out of this season, you won't be the same person who went in. You'll be stronger because you survived what should have broken you. Wiser because you learned what you couldn't learn in comfort. More compassionate because you know what it feels like to suffer alone. More convinced because your faith was tested in fire and it didn't burn up. More powerful because you discovered strength you didn't know you had. More useful to God because you proved you'll follow Him even when it costs everything. So stand tall in your loneliness. Stand strong in your isolation. Don't you shrink back. Don't you apologize for being different. Don't you water down your truth just to make people comfortable. You know where you're going, you know the truth, and you don't have to be what they want you to be. You're free to be what you believe. And that freedom, that conviction, that's going to change everything. Not just for you, for everyone your life touches, for everyone who's watching to see if standing alone is possible, for everyone who needs proof that God is real and faith works and truth matters. The will can never retire, the race can never stop, and faith can never weaken. Keep going, keep believing, keep standing. Outrun the people who quit when they feel discomfort. Outrun the people who stop because of despair. Outrun the people who are delayed because of prejudice. Outrun the people who surrender to failure. Outrun the opponent who loses sight of the goal. Because if you want to win, the will can never retire, the race can never stop, and faith can never weaken. This loneliness is temporary, but the person it's making you become, that's eternal. And the world needs who you're becoming, they just don't know it yet. If this message spoke to you today, if you felt like I was talking directly to your situation, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next teaching. Drop a like if this resonated with your spirit. And in the comments, I want you to tell me, what are you learning in your loneliness? What is God teaching you in your isolation? Share your story, because somebody else watching this needs to know they're not alone in feeling alone. Let's build each other up. Your testimony might be exactly what someone needs to hear today to keep going. So don't hold back. Share what you're going through. Share what you're learning. Share your victories and your struggles. We're all in this together, even when we feel alone. Until next time, remember this: when God is with you, no one can defeat you. The only thing that is real is the spiritual. Only God and love are real. So love yourself enough to stand alone when you have to. Trust God enough to believe He knows what He's doing. And have faith enough to know this loneliness is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of your transformation. Everything that God created has a purpose. You were born to accomplish a certain task. And this isolation, this wilderness, this loneliness, it's preparing you for that task. It's making you into the person who can carry out your assignment. So embrace it, learn from it, grow through it, and watch what God does with a person who's willing to stand alone for truth, peace,